This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Bruchim haba and welcome everyone to a special edition of All Parsha on Parshas Mishpatim. We're going to be sharing a number of insights from the Ramban. We would like, b'siyata d'shmaya, to share 5 important pieces in the Ramban on Parshas Mishpatim, and let us begin with the very first Ramban on this week's Parsha, and the Ramban will help us get an understanding as to the format and the flow of Parshas Mishpatim in the aftermath of Parshas Yisro, which of course the highlight was the Aseres HaDibros, the 10 Commandments. Says the Ramban, Parak Chaf Aleph, Pasuk Aleph, Tam Ve'ila Mishpatim Asher Tosem Lefneihem. The reason for this mitzvah being given now, the mitzvah of judgments, of laws, of monetary laws. Ki ratza lahaktim lahem hamishpatim. The reason why Hashem wanted to give them judgments in the beginning first, in the immediate aftermath of the Aseres HaDibros, says Ramban, Ki kasher haya ba'aseres HaDibros hadibra rishon b'yidiyas Hashem. We know the first of the 10 commandments is belief in the existence of the Creator. That is commandment number 1. That is the Dibra Aleph. V'habei is the second Dibra of Lo Yelecha B'Isra Avodah Zarah. So since the first Dibra was belief in the existence of God, and the second one was don't worship Avodah Zarah, therefore at the end of Parshas Yisro, if you recall, the Rebbe Hashem reiterates these 2 mitzvahs, where the pasuk says in Parak Chaf, pasuk Yotes, Chazar v'tziva es Moshe. Rebbe Hashem reiterated and commanded Moshe, Koisoymar al b'nei Yisrael atem re'isem, go tell the b'nei Yisrael, you yourself saw. That is a affirmation and a review of the mitzvah of Anochi Hashem Elokecha, referring to God's existence. And then immediately after that, in Parak Chaf, pasuk Chaf, we have the pasuk of Lo Sa'ason iti, that corresponds to Lo Yelecha. So Shetazhirim ata oid, you should warn them again, Sheyitnu libam, to pay attention and focus, Lamasharo, that which they saw, V'yizaru, and be careful, b'mitzvahs ha'elu shetzivisim, and these mitzvahs that you were commanded. Number 1, Ki ata ri'isem. If you look at the end of Parshas Yisro, says Ramban, there is a reiteration of Anochi Hashem. You saw, that's Keneged Dibor of Anochi. That corresponds to the statement Anochi Hashem Leikecha Asher Hoitzei Sicha Me'eretz Mitzrayim. And Keneged Lo Yelecha Leikim Achirim, we have Lo Sa'ason iti Keneged Lo Yelecha Lahashlim Inyan Avodah Zarah. That is the completion of the subject of Avodah Zarah. Now comes Parshas Mishpatim, and Parshas Mishpatim is again referencing and reiterating and affirming one of the Aseres HaDibros, Ve'ela HaMishpatim Keneged Lo Sachmaid, that corresponds to the 10th Dibra of don't covet. Now, what does Elu Mishpatim have to do with Lo Sachmaid? Well, says Ramban, Ki im lo yeda adam mishpan habayis v'hasad or shar hamamayim. If a person doesn't know the laws of ownership of home, field, and other monetary law, if a person doesn't know what belongs to him, what belongs to others, yachshav shehu shaloi, he'll think that what his friend has is actually his. V'yachmedeh, he'll covet it because he'll take it to himself. In other words, in order to strengthen the prohibition of lo sachmaid, one has to know clearly the laws of possession. This is mine, and that belongs to him, and I have no ownership over it. I can't even want it. But the way to affirm lo sachmaid is to know the mishpatim and to know the law of possession and ownership. So perhaps we can suggest and add biur, add understanding of this comment of the Ramban. Why, after explaining Anochi and Lo Yelecha at the end of Yisro, why does the end of Yisro reiterate Dibra 1 and 2, and then immediately go to Dibra 10, as if Dibra 10 is the most important after existence of God and not believing in Avodah Zarah? This could be explained by a comment of the Vilna Gaon that actually the entire Torah can be summed up and can be encapsulated in Lo Sachmaid, and therefore, after reiterating the existence of God and not worshipping idols, it goes to the most important dibur of the Aseres HaDibros, namely Lo Sachmaid. And then the Ramban says, Lefikach ki im lo yeda adam mishpat habayis v'asada, then he'll covet. Lefikach amar Therefore, it says, Tasim lohem mishpatim yisharim. You should give them just laws. That they should accustom themselves in and they will not desire what does not belong to them. And the Ramban continues by strengthening this idea that what appears in the immediate aftermath of the Aseres HaDibros are the fundamental laws. Says Ramban, V'kach amru b'medrash Rabbah. The Medrash Rabbah says, Kol HaTorah kula tuluya b'mishpat. The entire Torah is dependent on justice. Hence, justice needs to be emphasized in the aftermath of the Ten Commandments. And l'cheinas and HaKadosh Baruch Hu dinim achar Aseres HaDibros. That's why God gave the judgments after the Ten Commandments. V'chein yefaresh be'ila mishpatim hamishpat ba'avodah zara. Likewise, we'll have in Perek Chav Beis Pasuk Yotes further laws of idolatry, further upholding and affirming the Aseres HaDibros, and Ubekibed Ha'av, we have the laws of honor of a parent, which is also mentioned in the Aseres HaDibros, V'arotzicha and murder, V'haniyaf adultery, and these are all mentioned in the Aseres HaDibros. In other words, the Ramban learns that Ve'ila Mishpatim is in the aftermath of the giving of the Torah, especially the Ten Commandments, because these mitzvos are first of the mitzvos given to Klal Yisrael to solidify and to affirm that which was delivered in the Aseres HaDibros. Now, the Ramban continues on this theme in Pasuk Beis, explaining why Kisikne Evet Ivri, why the laws of ownership of a Jewish slave and freeing a Jewish slave after 6 years is the first law of Mishpatim mentioned. And here the Ramban says, Hischil hamishpat rishma eved ivri. Here the Torah begins the first law with the Jewish slave, because in freeing the slave in the 7th year is zeichel yitzias Mitzrayim, is a commemoration of the Exodus, and the Exodus was mentioned in the very first dibor anoichi Hashem lekecha asher hoitzeisicha me'eretz Mitzrayim hanizkar b'dibor rishon, which is mentioned in the first dibor. So again, the Ramban is continuing the theme that the flow of Parshas Mishpatim is upholding the Aseres HaDibros, and Kisikne Evet Ivri, the law of ownership of Jewish slave, is actually upholding the first dibor. Kamoisha Amar Ba. Now, what does the freedom of the Jewish slave have to do with remembering the Exodus? The Ramban says, if you look in Devarim, there clearly the Exodus, Yitzias Mitzrayim, is referenced in connection to the ownership of an Eved Ivri. It says, "V'zacharti ki Eved Yisrael Eretz Mitzrayim." You should remember that you were a slave in Egypt. Vayivtecha Hashem leikecha, and Hashem your God redeemed you. Al ken anochi mitzavach hadavar hazeh hayom. Therefore, I command you to do this matter today, namely freeing Jewish slaves. V'yesh ba'oid. There is furthermore, says Ramban, a connection to the creation of the world in the freedom of slaves. Namely, the Ramban says, the same way Shabbos is the 7th day of the week, remembering God created the world in 6 days and rested on the 7th year is also symbolic of the cycle of God's creation in a process of 6, culminating in resting on the 7th. Likewise, the 7th Shemitah, followed by Yovel, is reiterating the same concept. And the Ramban says, therefore, since it upholds the concept of creation, the Ramban uses a lashon, therefore it is nechbedes ma'oid, it is a very honorable mitzvah, and alluding to lofty matters of creation. And the Ramban says that's the reason why God sealed the covenant with the Jewish people the day that we left Egypt, specifically to free our slaves, and this is mentioned in the Navi Yirmiyah. I skip now in terms of reading toward the end of the Ramban, because we're now going to continue to get an understanding of the flow of Parshas Mishpatim. The Ramban says, "V'chashar hishlim mishpat hamitzvah zos ba'avodah ma'ivrim." Once the Torah completed the laws of this particular mitzvah of freeing Jewish slaves, Heichel b'mishpat lo yisirtzach. Now the Ramban says, the Torah goes on to explain another one of the 10 commandments, murder, shehi hachamura, which is of the most severe of the 10 commandments. So the Ramban learns that Mishpatim is upholding the Aseres HaDibros. The end of Yisro upheld Anoichi and Lo Yelecha, but then we begin with Mishpatim, which upholds loisach moed, and then kisikne eved ivri again, which goes back and upholds Yetzias Mitzrayim, connected to the first dibur. And now we're going to loisirtzach, which is expounded upon in Mishpatim next, and then the Torah in Parak Tes Vav and Pasuk Tes Vav and Yud Zayin in this Parak Chaf Aleph talks about honoring father and mother, and then says Ramban Uvloi Signov, kidnapping, which is also mentioned in the Ten Commandments, and then it goes back to murder, V'chazer L'mishpat Maki Ish Belisha Yamasba, then it goes back, to wounding somebody, which is not a wound of a murderous wound, and then it talks about the murder of an Eved, and followed by the murder of an unborn child, of a Vlad, and followed by the damage of an Aver to a Jew or to an Eved. And the Ramban says, and then to the damage that one's animal may inflict. But the Ramban concludes, V'chol ha-Parsha b'sidur of a kavana nechayna. The flow of the whole Parsha is in a very orderly, methodical approach, where the general theme is to uphold the Aseres HaDibros, and those mitzvos that uphold the Aseres HaDibros are then further branched off into subsidiary mitzvos that are mashlim, the subject of the mitzvos that were mentioned before. Let us go to Parak Chaf Beis, Pasuk Chaf Daled, where the Ramban talks about the inyan of usury, the inyan of charging interest. Now it's interesting. We know the Torah says, Kesef talve es ami. If money you will lend my people, which Chazal say, im is not if, but what im is, you need to do so. There's a mitzvah in the Torah to lend money to a Jew in need. That is the mitzvah of im kesef talve es ami. Now the Torah says, don't be like a creditor to him, loisia like kenoisha, loisa siman olav neshech. Do not put interest on him. Now let's think about it. If you don't lend money to somebody, you violate a mitzvah aseh of im kesef talva, which is a commandment. If you lend money but you charge interest, you violate a lav of lois simon olav neshech, don't charge interest. So it comes out, it's worse to lend money with interest than not to lend at all. Now why would that be? This person needs a loan. He needs $10,000 to buy a house. You say, here's $10,000, in a year give me $11,000. He goes to two people. He goes to Ruvain. Ruvain doesn't want to lend him the money. So Ruvain gets nailed with an aseh. He violates an aseh. Shimon lends him the money but charges interest. He gets nailed with a lav. But why is Shimon worse than Ruvain? Shimon did the chesed. He just charged some interest. Ruvain was callous. Ruvain was insensitive. He didn't even want to lend the money in the first place. Why is it worse to lend with interest than not to lend at all? Now Rashi seems to give us a rationale for why interest is so destructive. Rashi says it's like the bite of a snake, where you don't even realize you're bit, but then the venom creeps up on you and spreads, and it takes over your whole body. That's the same thing with interest. Because the charges accrue and the interest rates increase, and you're supposed to pay him 1,000 and you don't pay him right away, so it ends up being more and more and more and more. And before he ends up losing a lot of money. So he borrowed $1,000. Who knows, in the end he could pay a tremendous sum of money. So in fact, it is worse in the ideology of Rashi to lend with interest than not to lend at all. However, the Ramban, I just want to read the final words of the Ramban. The Ramban, after explaining what it means, loisia loy kenoisha, don't be like a creditor to him, the Ramban says an amazing line. The Ramban says, loisa siman olav neshech. The Ramban says, you know why you shouldn't charge interest? Aval tia hahalva elav chesed. When you lend him the money, it should be a kindness. Loisita mimenu toyelas kavod. You should not be looking to take honor from your mitzvah. V'loi toyelas mamain, or a benefit of money. So therefore the Torah says, don't charge interest because you have an opportunity to do a chesed to another Jew. Don't lose the opportunity. Don't trivialize and make it little by saying, you know what, I don't want the mitzvah. I want to get some extra cash out of it. The Ramban is saying the prohibition of interest is you're trying to profit from a mitzvah. That's not right to profit from a mitzvah. But let's just analyze this for a moment. I remember hearing this this ha'ara and this analysis on the Ramban from one of my Rosh Yeshivas, Rabbi Yehuda Jacobson, Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshivat Faris Yisrael. Think about what the Ramban is saying. It comes out, if somebody doesn't want to lend money at all, so he's a callous person and he's over an asay. But even worse than not doing the mitzvah is having the opportunity to do a favor, and you're willing to do a favor, but you want to monetize the mitzvah. Monetizing a mitzvah, it's so looked down upon in the eyes of the Torah that in a way it's even worse to lend money with interest than not to lend at all. Let's move on to the next Ramban. The Ramban says that this is talking about a scenario where you have to take a security from somebody who you lent money to, but you need to return it to him when he needs it. It says the pasuk, "Kihi kisusa lavada." This is his only clothing. He's simla soila iroi. This is his cloak for his skin. Bamei yishkav. What will he lie on? V'haya obi ki yitzak elai. When he cries out to me, v'shamati, I will listen to it. Ki chanon ani. I am compassionate. Says the Ramban, the word chanon means choinen. I'm gracious. Umekabel tchinas kaladam. I accept anyone's supplication. Afal pisha enoi hagon. Even if they're not fit. Migzeras chinam. The word chanon comes from chinam, for nothing. V'ha'inyan, what the Torah is saying is, shelo yachshav. This is the Ramban. Perek chav beis pasuk chavav. Don't think, lo yachbal salmas hatzadik. I won't take a security, the garment of a righteous man, because I know if he cries out, God will listen to his cry. Aval salmas adam sheinu tzadik ekach. But I'll take the garment of someone who is maybe an evil person, a bad person, or not a tzaddik. I won't return it because God won't listen to his prayer. What do I have to worry about? He's going to pray to God. Why would God listen to him? No, God says, I listen for nothing. From here, we derive I listen to anyone who supplicates before me. What an inspiring Ramban. The Ramban says, watch out. Don't take the garment even of this person who is not a big tzaddik, who maybe even is a rasha. Because if he cries out to me, I will listen. God, why will you listen to him? Ki chanonani. Because I listen for nothing. That is how God operates. He just listens to people's prayer. This is something we have to ingrain in our heart, in our soul, that God listens to our prayer, not because we're worthy. Ki chanon, he listens for nothing. That's how Hashem operates. I have to share with you one final Ramban, Parak Chav Dalid, Pasuk Vav, the Na'arei B'nai Yisrael. It says that Moshe sent the youths of B'nai Yisrael to bring a carbon oila. This refers to the karbanos brought at Har Sinai. The Targum says, who are these Na'arim? Says the Targum, the Buchrei, these were the firstborn. They were the ones who brought the karbanos. The Ramban asks a question on Targum. I don't understand why the B'chairim were called Na'arim, youths. They could have been very old. Why are they called youths? Maybe, says Ramban, in contrast to the men mentioned later in Pasuk Yud Aleph, the Atzilei B'nai Yisrael, who were the Zakenim, so they were the elders. In contrast to them, the B'chairim did not have to be elders, but they could have been youths in terms of their wisdom and in their standing. And the point being, the message the Torah is conveying is that they were not chosen because of their old age, but merely because of their pedigree that they were b'chayrim. However, the Ramban says now his own interpretation, which is something very moving to me. Va'al derech hapshat, the simple meaning of the pasuk of Na'arei B'nai Yisrael. Who were these Na'arim? Heim Bachure Yisrael. These were the young men of Klal Yisrael. So why were they selected to bring the karbanos? Shaloi to'amu tamchet. Because they were young. They never involved themselves in the pleasure of marriage or in the pleasure of an isha. Shaloi nigshu el isha me'olam. They never approached a woman. Shaloi to'amu tamchet. They never tasted sin. Says Ramban, young men, a bachor, heim hanivcharim Ba'am. They are the choicest among the people. V'hakadoshim b'hem, they are the holiest. Similar to what our Chazal teach us in the Gemara in Brachas Mem Gimel. Says the Gemara, Asidin Bachure Yisrael, the young men of Klal Yisrael are destined, those shalai toamu tamchet, those who never tasted the taste of sin, litain reich kalavanon, to give off a beautiful fragrance like the Lebanon. Says the Ramban, why were the Na'arim selected to bring the karbanos? Because they were young men. They never involved themselves in any semblance of impropriety or sin. They were just in their pristine purity, and therefore they are the holiest and the choicest of Klal Yisrael. Kihem hanivcharim ba'am v'hakadoshim b'hem. They are the choicest and the holiest. What a beautiful concept when we think of Bachure Yeshivais, when we think of young men studying Torah. And sometimes we say, why should they study? Why should we support them? Let them support us. But there's an idea that the young men of Klal Yisrael, who never tasted sin, they have a certain purity, they have a certain innocence, and they are the Kedoshim, and they are the Bachurim, and even Chazal recognize that there's a certain scent of purity that wafts from them, a certain Kedusha that they offer all of Klal Yisrael. And therefore we should look back at those days of our life as perhaps the greatest days of our life, and we should look at those members of Klal Yisrael who are dedicated to Torah in that stage of their life as, in a way, the pillars of the Jewish people. So here are 5 offerings of the Ramban on Parshas Mishpatim, wishing everyone a wonderful week and a wonderful Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh, Adar, Haba Aleinu L'Taiva.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.